This Restorative Justice Life is a production of Amplify RJ. Follow us on all social media platforms at Amplify RJ, sign up for our email list, and check out our website at amplifyrj.com to stay up to date on everything we have going on. Make sure you're subscribed to this feed on whatever platform you're listening on right now so you don't miss an episode. And finally, we'd love it if you left us a rating and review. It really helps us literally amplify this work. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to This Restorative Justice Life, the podcast that explores how the philosophy, practices, and values of restorative justice apply to our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for the ancestors, and I'm the founder of Amplify RJ. On this podcast, I talk with RJ practitioners, circle keepers, and others doing this work about how this way of being has impacted their lives.
Hey folks, I'm Elise, your producer, and I am so excited to welcome Sheryl Wilson today to our podcast. Sheryl has been a practitioner, trainer, and educator in restorative justice for over 15 years and has had the honor of working with individuals from around the world in her practices. She really addresses the importance of people of color in activism and deconstructs whiteness within activism, as well as sparking a conversation about equity and restorative justice. Before we get into this episode, I want to quickly remind you of our announcements. Our YouTube channel has recently launched where we are posting our podcast clips in short, digestible bites, which you can find in the show notes below. Also, please check out our Future Ancestors Collective, which is an amalgamation of different community spaces, and we'd love to see you join us. Additionally, we have our biggest collaboration yet on Saturday, April 3rd. Just from the Instagram account, So You Want to Talk About Blank is hosting Intro to RJ workshops for her community of over 2.4 million followers. We are pulling all the Amplify RJ facilitators together to run multiple Zoom meetings, and we would love to have you join us for this special event. Well, enough of me. Let's get into this conversation.
Welcome, Sheryl. Who are you?
I am a daughter of the South, the Deep South.
Who are you?
I am a daughter of 2 loving African American parents who were the first in their generation to trailblaze in their fields.
Who are you?
I am a wife and a mother of African American men.
Who are you?
I am a lover of my African American roots and history.
Who are you?
I am a proud practitioner of restorative justice in the ways that it connects to my heritage, to my history, and the ways that I'm able to look at how this learned way of repairing harm can connect to repairing historical harm.
Who are you?
I am a person who loves connecting with people. I'm an introvert, but I probably present very, very well as an extrovert.
And finally, who are you?
I'm a believer that all people are redeemable.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited for this conversation to talk about all the intersections of those things that you just mentioned. But it's always good to check in first. So, to the fullest extent of the question, how are you?
I'm good. I feel like right now my life is very jam packed with projects and um, work. My day to day work it keeps me busy around the clock. My work days go very long sometimes and weekends. But what I'm feeling good about is I'm finding more time for balance, and that does kind of make the creative juices flow a little better. I'm getting more rest, which wasn't the case in 2020. And so I'm feeling better in that way. And I just feel like my soul has had some refreshment in recent weeks.
Yeah, that's so good to hear. What are the changes that you've made to start to shift towards balance?
I think part of it has been how I've responded to my health, like sleeping better, and the reality for me is I was never a person that had trouble going to sleep at night
Mm-hmm.
until after the murder of George Floyd,
Mm.
and I developed insomnia, and I have not really gone back from that, but I've had to do some different things to get to sleep at night. And so as a result, I'm just trying to uh, take myself more seriously. I've really become a greater student of mindfulness. I think I knew enough to be dangerous prior to recent times, but I've really started to read more, talk to folks who are greater practitioners than myself. I've enrolled in a couple of courses, that kind of thing, because I really want to be a better student, and mindfulness and meditation, all those things that probably feed into my wellness in ways that I really wasn't doing to the fullest extent.
Yeah, mindfulness, better sleep, more creativity. Any other
Mm-hmm.
shifts?
Really tapping into what makes me happy rather than pursuing things through the sense of obligation that many of us, and I'll say a lot of practitioners, we feel this. We feel like we need to help everybody who comes to our door, and sometimes it saps our joy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean, obviously it's hard when people are going through painful situations, but what I mean by the sapping my joy is when I am not mindful of boundaries. I am letting people step beyond, just doing things in ways that don't necessarily connect to my values. And I have probably uh, I've been better at saying no. So that I can say yes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I imagine both. We didn't mention either of your jobs yet, but both as but both as president of NACRJ and executive director of KIPCOR. So many different responsibilities come up. We don't need to go into like all the nuances of balancing what each of those entail, but
Yeah.
those positions of leadership do require such strong boundaries. You've been doing restorative justice work for a very long time. You're the first, if not you're one of the first, if not the first person who actually has a degree with the word restorative justice in the name. But I know you've been doing this work longer than you probably even knew the words. So, in your own words, how did this all get started for you?
Oh wow. Yeah, it's funny because the years have flown by, and I started doing the work out of the womb. For those of you who are trying to guess my age, um, no, I was I was actually a student taking a course in mediation because I'd started school as a journalism major. Kind of fell out of love with journalism. No disrespect to journalists. Have high regard for them. I just knew that it wasn't cracking up. All that was cracked up to be for me. And so in that time frame, I started to examine what is it about journalism that I love so much. And it was really the connection with humans, the connection with people, and also working, problem solving, things like that kind of appealed to me. So mediation, therefore taking courses in mediation. So, just the typical mediation courses that my college offered. I went to the University of Minnesota. So I took all those courses, but one of them was a little more robust, and it was taught by a person who became a mentor of mine, Dr. Mark Umbright. And what ended up happening was that was the first time I heard the words restorative and justice ever put together, and thought this is really interesting. And by the time I finished the course, the light bulb was over my head. Like, this is something I could see myself doing. Like, and I remember just trying to figure out how this would be implemented in my day-to-day work life, because I was in the corporate world back then, and totally like trying to figure out how can I do this work in my day-to-day job, and of course not having enough skill to do it then. Totally can see it now, and am doing it now in some corporate like settings. But at that time I didn't understand how to apply it, but I knew that I was onto something. And then when I really kind of turned up the switch and decided to go back to school for a graduate degree, Mark Umbright said, "Hey, if you do this, I will continue to work with you." And I applied and actually got a position as his TA. And really, in some ways, that was, as the rest, as they say, the rest is history.
For sure.
I really felt privileged to be exposed to a lot of the work. He took me to work on cases that were very intense, victim offender type cases, and then of course facilitation and training and all of that. Getting to work with him at the Center for Restorative Justice and Peacemaking back then was a great honor, because I got exposed to so much in a short period of time, and got to meet people from all around the world. That was an amazing time.
Yeah. You got to do that through school, but you said you've been doing this work out of the womb. What did that mean?
No, I meant that, just saying I'm not that old. But honestly, you can do the math. That course that changed my life, that was in 1993.
Yeah.
So now I'm saying that, and some of these people are like, I wasn't even born in 1993. And I will tell you something else. At that time, I was 8 months pregnant with my oldest son. And that's how I know how many years, because of his age, that I've been doing this work in some capacity. I'll say that the work came after the knowledge. And so I'd give it about 8 years or so before I was actually what I would call a practitioner doing cases. So still about 20 years, I'd go back to those early years of, being mentored into the work, but doing the work at the same time, and Minnesota roots, and then being able to train around the country has exposed me to a lot.
Yeah. This is sometimes a question that I ask at the end. What does restorative justice mean to you now? What did it mean to you then?
Wow. Okay, so for me, it felt like redemption. So when I first started to learn what this is, and, in trainings and stuff like that, I started thinking about stuff in my own life. Like, what had I done? What do I need to fix? I remember having very intense conversations. I remember being at one training where I called my parents about some stuff, and I was like, I probably didn't handle that well, and I need to apologize. I remember calling my brother about some things. I have a brother that's 2 years younger, so we did a lot of stuff together, and when we were kids, and I just remember things that I said or did. I was trying to make amends in my own way, in those times. So a lot of it for me was personal work. And then I started to see the possibilities when I started doing cases about, like when you start working on these cases, I think, now I've not tested this or talked to a bunch of people about this, but I wonder sometimes about that trust factor, because we talk about trusting the process, right? But you got to start somewhere. And there are some times when I would be sitting there, I'd be working with people, and I'm not sure if I have done the right amount of transference of knowledge so that they get what they're supposed to do, or how they're supposed to, respond. You hope that you prepare well, because it's a lot of our work is in the preparation, right? And so it's always amazing to me when people get it, and it just makes me trust it all the more. But so that's what it meant then. What it means to me now, I can see restorative processes in everything. I used to get nervous about, well, wait a minute, crimes that sexual violence, I don't know, corporate type of ways that we do restorative practices. I can't see it. But now I really do see how, and I think it's because we have become more empathetic. I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying I think as the corporate environments have become less formal, there are ways that people are engaging in practices that are more humanistic, that are transformative, and they can see it, and they're starting to come to us to say, hey, we want to try this. It is so refreshing to have somebody go, well, we need a circle process for this, because I don't think we can, like I'm working with organizations that have very, like very, what I would consider to be narrow ways that they had previously dealt with one another, and they have decided we need to dismantle that because it's not working for us, and we need to try something new. And what restorative justice has to offer is that something new.
It's just so interesting to see the growth over the 20 years.
Yeah.
You've done this work all across the country. Tell us some of the highlights, and what are some of the things that you're up to now?
Well, I'll say I've had the privilege of, it has been a journey of just connecting with people that do this work, that have invited me along for trainings. And then it's been opportunities where, I've been able to go it alone or whatever. But I've had the opportunity to sit and circle with people from around the world who have come to Minnesota for trainings, from the Center for Restorative Justice and Peacemaking. I also got the opportunity to work with people who are doing a truth and reconciliation process. The Liberian TRC happened in 2008, and they had their diaspora process in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the summer of 2008, and I was asked to organize a group of restorative justice practitioners to serve as support people for those who were giving testimony. And I'll just never forget that experience. I personally have Liberian friends in the Minneapolis community, and I knew how much this meant to them to have these opportunities, and I just it just to help people hold space, to hold them up, to undergird them in whatever ways they needed, was a privilege and an honor. And then later, I worked for an organization that supported the Atlanta contingent of that group, in another capacity, and it was just really continuing the work with the diaspora on a local level in the Atlanta area, working for Southern Truth and Reconciliation, and just having the opportunity to have that type of impact, whether even in small ways. Other things that I've done had to do with training.
Can I push in on that? Like, you're talking about like these big processes, like these big corporate processes. What do those small impacts look like?
I think the small impacts look like helping people to make meaning. When one particular person went and gave testimony, we sat with this man, and he just kept saying to himself, I did it. If you can imagine having, for many of the folks who participated in that process, where they were having the opportunity to talk with people who impacted the government of Liberia, to talk about harm that they experienced. When they just had buried that, moved on, moved to the United States, started over, nobody ever knew. Mm-hmm. And some of these people were like, in their country, they would be kind of the equivalent of royalty.
Yeah.
And they had like everything taken away from them. And some of the women just naming sexual harm, naming the property that you had in your family for generations just taken away, and you couldn't go back today and claim it. I can't even imagine what that would be like. And just to have people who have gone through those processes come and sit with us, and just whatever they needed. And I just remember this one man, he just wept, and he was just like, I did it. I said it. I said my truth. Mm-hmm. And I just think about just being there to hold space with somebody and not be more like a fly on the wall. And yes, we're used to, as practitioners, doing a lot of orchestration, facilitation, but I mean, I just think sometimes being restorative is meeting someone where they're at, not requiring anything of them, not asking them any questions, but you are there as a support for whatever they need. That doesn't make you a doormat, but that makes you someone who can help. When someone has given everything to something, especially when they have given something so emotionally draining, and that we can still be there to help to be strong for them, I think that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing work.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't like make those connections, but that's important too.
I'm curious. You were gonna share more of the training highlights, and I want to get back to that. But I'm curious, like you talked about like this act of naming harm. Your chapter in Colorizing Restorative Justice is about calling out whiteness. I'm curious if the process of writing this book served a similar purpose for you.
It did, because I think that idea had been with me for a long time, and I had not written one word. It was just in my head. Yeah. Because when I started doing the work when I did, very few people I would run into, especially because of where I lived. I was in very white community in Minnesota. I lived in the Twin Cities, so the Twin Cities is very diverse. But if you kind of break down certain things, I'm at the University of Minnesota. I am an African American woman. I am in the School of Social Work. I am not even, doing what everybody kind of connected in that time as social work. And not only that, but having a set of skills that's not even today, we still talk about it. People are like, huh, what are you doing? There's still, so you go all those steps, all those layers. I was the only in a lot of situations, the only African American, sometimes the only person of color, especially when I was doing community mediation, when they call it mediation. A lot of restorative justice work fell under that back then, but doing work in the community, in restorative justice communities, where a lot of the programming was done by white people. And so when I would show up, or I would talk to someone on the phone, they wouldn't always know.
Right.
And so then I would show up looking like me. And for those of you who don't see my picture, I'm pretty chocolate brown. So I show up and, there's a pause. There's, or if I show up with a white person who might be co-facilitating with me, sometimes what would happen is that person would talk more to the white person than to me.
Yeah.
Or assume that the white person knew more. All of that. And, I could go on in terms of how some of this showed up, but I think mainly the opportunities for people of color versus white people was kind of the biggest rub. There were a lot of our white colleagues who got better opportunities, who probably got better paying jobs, you just name it across the gamut. Now, I feel fortunate in that I had a lot of my white colleagues who looked out for me, who made sure that on some levels I got what was equitable. They didn't leave me behind. Not in every situation, but in a lot of situations. Mm-hmm. And so I feel privileged because of that. But I just know a lot of people, and I'll say I even have my own moments. I was just sharing this with Mark Bright the other day, because I spoke with his class the other day, and he asked me to think back, and I said, when he asked me to to consider coming on the board for NACRJ, I had basically said to myself, I don't know if this is something that loves me back. And I may have to consider pivoting and doing something different. I did a lot of soul searching in that moment, and I had pretty much made up my mind, and out of the blue, he called me. And he said, what do you think? Do you want to consider being on the board? And that was kind of like a shift. Had I said no, I don't know that I would be here talking to you today. I don't know that I could say, name that number of years. That might have been a part of my life that I said goodbye to and done something else going forward, because I had just made up my mind, this doesn't always love me back, because of some of the things that happened to me around who gets the opportunities and who doesn't.
One, I'm really grateful that you are in the role that you're in, because you are someone who has been able to give opportunities and make sure that kind of equity and opportunity happens. But I'm curious, what in that moment made you take the next step to stay in this?
I think it was a sign. When you say I'm not doing something and something just kind of almost comes out of the sky, Mark and I had stayed in contact, but it had been a great while probably since I had heard from him in that time frame. But we always, the thing was, we always had work we were doing together for a long time.
Sure.
But I had moved away from the Twin Cities, so the work just kind of, he moved on, I moved on. I moved to another place. I moved to a place that didn't necessarily embrace restorative justice. I wasn't going to set the world on fire where I was at. And that was when I decided, this does not resonate everywhere I go. What am I going to do with myself? And I probably, like I said, I was looking for something related, but I wasn't going to put myself on that RJ platform to say, here I am, open for business, put my shingle out, not happening. So when he said to me, this is something that I really would like for you to consider, I did exactly that. I didn't say yes on the spot. I thought about it. And I did see it as my fork in the road, if you will.
Yeah.
And it meant it wasn't like NACRJ was established. It was when NACRJ was an idea based on the conferences that Mike Gilbert had been doing as a one-man show around the country, partnering with people, and someone said you should form an association as a result. Now, I will say in the back of my mind, because I was also a board member of what I would consider to be a predecessor of NACRJ, is the Victim Offender Mediation Association, which a lot of the OGs in the field will know what about VOMA. And I happened to be on their board before they folded. And so I knew the inner workings of an organization like that. So in some ways, that was what I was thinking about. Could some of that knowledge go into this association to do some similar things? And, I think I talked to a couple of colleagues and I really decided it doesn't matter. It's not like NACRJ had money in the bank and we were just doing all this stuff and all of that. It was like we started from nothing, from $0. I was the treasurer. I was the first treasurer. We had $0 in the bank. We had money that was coming from a conference that we did in Toledo. That was it. And so it's kind of an interesting and fine place to start, because now looking back, it's just been amazing the way people have responded to us as an organization and how we've grown.
Yeah, we're kind of the story's all interconnected, right? But I'm just going to follow the threads where they are. You are now the president of NACRJ. Tell us about the growth of the organization from there and what y'all do, what y'all are doing now.
Well, I will say, in thinking about the chapter I wrote, because it's an organization that could have easily been, in a lot of ways, run and people serving on the board who were very white. But with intention, there were people of color always on our board. Notable people of color and founding members, Fania Davis being one of the founding members of NACRJ, who helped to form. She worked with others who helped to form get their 501c3 status, along with Michael Gilbert. I know it was John Powell, Joanne Katz, and Fania, I believe, worked together. And our board was always diverse. I think that was definitely intentional. And so that was the other thing that was a driver for me, is I knew that being part of something where I'm who I am and what I represent is important for other people to see as well. So becoming president was kind of a thing where, man, I'm so appreciative of people's confidence in me to do this job. and it's not taken lightly. I think about the ways that I show up and get to connect with the people around the country who do this work in tireless ways, who may not even know that people are paying attention. It's so exciting to learn from folks in various ways around the country. That's been a privilege and an honor and something I will never get over. And I think being a person of color, especially a Black woman, I I think about the ways that, I could have been doing something else and not having these experiences. And I'm like, wow, I get to be here. Wow, I get to experience that. Wow, I get to learn from so and so. And I don't care. I don't care about your titles. I don't care about, whether you wrote something, whether you didn't write something, whether you have notoriety or not. I just feel excited to learn. And I always say we're like that book, the Dr. Seuss book, Horton Hears a Who. We're here. There's people who are doing things in places that, I just think that I'm grateful that I get to be a part of that. So when I think about how this connects to my chapter, I just think that's what is important, is everybody being as inclusive as possible in the ways that the ideas happen, because we know that things start a certain place, and we always want the people in our camps to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately for white people, a lot of times what happens is they may gravitate toward other white people.
Right.
And what I challenge people to do in my chapter is, if you are not thinking in terms of diversity, and I use that term loosely because diversity has been...
I was going to ask you about that, but...
Yeah. To think in ways that everybody of ability and ethnicity and race, all of those ways that we bring people together are not, if they're not considered when starting a project, launching an idea, then you need to dismantle it. I just challenge people. There's not a way to go back and fix it if you've already built it and you made all the decisions with a bunch of other white people. And then you just add in, a person, and many people of color, many Black people will say, I was called at the last minute.
Right.
I didn't get to make any decisions. Mm-hmm. And I'm window dressing.
Right. This idea of quote unquote including people from quote unquote diverse backgrounds into a system or an institution or group founded on not just like whiteness, like white bodies, but like white supremacy culture. That ain't it, right? When we're talking about diversity and inclusion. And so I love this idea of like dismantle and rebuild. NICRJ, it seems like with intention, was built with this idea of bringing people from all backgrounds and building collectively. How has that continued to be a part of your work?
And I'm going to say, I think there was intention to create it to be diverse. I don't, I think we have become more intentional as we have gone on about what that means. Thinking more inclusively than we had probably, because I wasn't at the very start of the organization, but I was very close. But I just see where we have always had a diverse group of people, but I think we're growing even more in being inclusive in ways that we hadn't been in the past. But I think with every with every conference, we learn more, we do better. And we have, just like anything else, you have your critics. And I think the critics are what make us stronger as an association, because we know that we are growing. We know that, we're still a relatively young association.
2013,
13.
right?
Yeah, not even 10 years old. And to say that we had at our last conference 1,600 people come and under the umbrella of restorative justice, that's pretty darn amazing.
Yeah.
And so I just say, we know that what has to keep happening is we have to keep being more open, growing more, and continuing to evolve. I think what it looks like especially now, we've learned, especially because of the time that we're in, we may not have that number for some time. We may not reach 1,600. I have no idea what's going. There's this camp that says, oh no, there's going to be more people because people are going to be so excited to come next year to a conference anywhere, and are going to be so excited about getting together. We may exceed our numbers, or there may be, oh well, I'm not quite ready to get out there yet, but we have learned how to do this virtually so well that even if we don't have an in-person number that exceeds 1,600 people, I guarantee you who will be coming around the world virtually will get us toward past that number. We've learned how to connect in a lot of new ways. I think what is going to be highly important in the ways that we come together the next time, it will be under this idea that we need to be anti-racist. It's a mandate. It's not an option. It used to be and anti-racism training, something you might want to add on, for white folk. And I'm saying at this point in the game, especially given all that we have had in our racial reckoning following the murder of George Floyd, it's on. If you do not have an anti-racism training that you have attended, but you are doing human services work, I say shame on you. And so I think that is a new way that we are needing to gravitate toward as we go into the next conference. I say that the ways that we have, what I believe in the ways that we exist as people who do this type of work, we have a message that I feel is on the tip of everybody's tongues. There are people who are talking about restorative justice that haven't quite named it. I don't really care that they name it, but I think that the ways that people are leaning into their understandings of this is right there. And our messaging needs to be more bold as we come into next year at the conference. And I think also coming out of this time of sheltering in from the COVID-19 virus, so what does it look like to come back out into the world, and how is restorative justice meeting that moment? That's the big question that we're asking ourselves.
Yeah, this idea of interconnection, right? How we've been able to create those connections still on digital platforms has been a huge area of growth for me. Amplify RJ, at the time we're recording this, is just under a year old. By the time this post, it'll be just over a year old. And
Great.
We pretty quickly ran up against the reckoning for racial justice, right? And I had collaborated with some folks to talk about, okay, so like I'm going to do an intro to RJ, right? And it's just like restorative justice principles. Here's this RJ tree. Yes, one of our values is equity, and maybe like, and I'll be specific about saying racial equity, but not going like deeper into that. After May, like it had to be explicit, right? Intro to RJ is intro to racial and restorative justice, right? Those two R's. And I think one of the things that's been really helpful is the work of Tema Okan around characteristics of white supremacy culture. We had her on the podcast at the beginning of this year, right? We're comparing that, like, you know, racism is not just about using the N-word, racial slurs, or like lack of opportunity. It's about all the ways that like whiteness is upheld, right? And anybody can uphold whiteness, right? And so framing characteristics of white supremacy against restorative justice practices, like those two things can be antidotes. Restorative justice can be an antidote to white supremacy culture and the harm that it causes. And like, it's gotta be explicit. Otherwise, to your point, yeah, right, it's irrelevant, right? It's not that we're trying to, we don't practice restorative justice, or we don't go through a restorative process in a vacuum. We live, you and I live in the United States of America, where racialized harm is happening all the time because of the ways that we're structurally set up. And so as much as like we need to address individual harm, it happens inside of a structure, and we need to be working to transform that at the same time.
That's right. I mean, I think that this idea about whiteness not just being owned by white people is important for everybody to understand. We were having this conversation in a previous. I did a talk with one of my co-authors, Anita Wadwa, and she and I talk about whiteness, and we talk about it as a way of thinking and doing that anybody can buy into, that a lot of people have bought into, including people of color. And so the idea that we dismantle it's dismantling that way of thinking and doing. It's the having the meeting before the meeting. Is the, wait a minute, where did you get your credentials from? It's the, who do you know? It's all of those things that say, I'm privileging myself in a way that I'm better, I'm smarter, I can wax and wane better than you, so that I can get this opportunity, be higher up on the food chain.
Right.
I'm a believer in that whole idea that we can all win. All boats can rise. We do not have to pit each other against everybody in order to get opportunity. And I think that's the lie that we buy into with whiteness, is that somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose, somebody's got to be on the bottom for other people to be on the top.
Right, like that individualism, right? Which is which capitalism, right, traps us in, and is a messy cycle.
Yeah, but just, I could talk about that whole idea of whiteness for a while, but, I think the other thing that I thought about with whiteness that kind of came out of a lived experience of uncomfortability, physical uncomfortability, is how whiteness can be greedy.
Yeah.
I remember sitting on a plane. I had, when I moved to Kansas to take my position at KIPCOR, Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, I had to move out by myself, and my family stayed in North Carolina, where I had been previous to then, and I would fly back as often as I could. And I just remember sometimes I get that Priceline, whatever, glad to be on the plane seat. And I sat in the back of the plane in the corner, and it's not even a whole seat. And some of you might know what I'm talking about. And I'm not a small person. And I just remember sitting in that seat, praying and hoping that that middle seat wouldn't be occupied. But of course it was. And it was a white woman that sat next to me. I don't know that she even greeted me. I think she just sat herself down, and she was not a small person. And I mean, armrest, shifting of her body to the in ways that she was overlapping into my little space that I had, and I had to push and nudge over half the flight to stay in my space.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just an exercise in uncomfortability in the space of whiteness. And I thought, that's what this is. It's like her idea of feeling so entitled that she could just come in and take up the space in the ways that she did just made me know I don't think it's intentional all the time.
It doesn't matter.
I think
the impact.
it doesn't matter. You're right. But the impact of it for me is that I shouldn't have to stand for that, and I shouldn't have to fight constantly. And that was what it felt like. If you can think of anything you're holding at bay, it's a lot of work to do that. And yet, if white people were mindful, or whiteness, that idea of who holds the whiteness, if that individual or group is mindful and everybody stays where in their lane, then everybody has enough space. And so in some ways, that whole idea of somebody having the right to more, when you decide that you have the right to more, you have to also remember that you're denying someone and they're getting less. And I don't think that people always think about that in their whiteness. And that's part of what that was for me.
Yeah. In the chapter you talk about like a call for allies, and I know people use different words: ally, accomplice, co-conspirator, advocate. What is your message for folks who are embodying whiteness?
I think I don't think there's anything wrong with having allies. I think allies are great. And you hear the tone in my voice. I think they're great. I think an accomplice is when I get turned on, like, yeah, you are with me lockstep. I go down, you go down. And see, I'm going to say something else here. I lose my job, you lose your job. I go to jail, you go to jail. You know, that's an accomplice. Anything less than that, where and I use the ways that, you know how you get these mailers and they say you can opt out at any time, or you can opt out at any time on something on the internet, emails. So the idea that the person who's white can opt out at any time when it starts to make them feel uncomfortable, it starts to encroach on their comfortable spaces, they can opt out. That is where the difference between allyship and being an accomplice kind of end. When there is always an exit strategy, and I think that's true for an ally. It's not that I think that they're thinking of it that way, but it's a comfortable space. It's like I can read up, I can learn, I can empathize, I can even come and sit with you over something, you know, that you've experienced as a person of color, and I can be there for you. But I'm not with you when it goes down. I'm not necessarily experiencing the same level of discomfort that you are experiencing. And nor would you as an accomplice all the time, but that you would allow yourself to be open to that is a whole separate thing. So that's what I think of when I think of those two words that I describe them.
we have people who are Black, people of color, and white people reading Colorizing Restorative Justice. Who did you intend to write for?
I'm speaking to both, but what I'm trying to do is speak to white people as this is what you need to hear and do. And I think as far as people of color, and I'll say for me as a Black woman, I'm saying, I'm hoping I'm telling our story. I'm hoping that something I'm saying resonates with you and you feel validated and honored in some fashion. But I'm not necessarily saying to people of color that you have to do something. I don't think it's a call to action. The only thing I would say that is call to action is to not give up. That's the only thing I would say. That if there's anything to be learned or to do from what I've shared in my words, it is just never give up speaking your truth. Never give up the positions that you have to dismantle things that aren't right. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, that's affirming to me. I think part of me is always when I read something where it's written to both audiences, right? I also, as a person of color, I think most people listening to this know that I'm Black and Filipino, but as a person of color, I feel affirmed, and like I also feel the challenge to use or dismantle the power and privilege that like the intersections of my identity still allow me to enjoy. Dismantle all of that power and privilege, right? My maleness, my middle to upper classness, my level of education, like some of those things, right? Like my cisness, right? My immigration status, like there are so many more intersections of my identity than just like, oh, I'm a brown person, right? And as I do this work as a restorative justice practitioner who is, amplifying this work, like how am I not replicating those systems of harm? It's a call to me, so I feel it both ways. So thank you for that. I'm curious, as you've grown in this work, if there's been like an oh shit moment, and what have you learned from it? And it can be like in your individual practice, it can be on the NACRJ level, it could be in your personal life as you've done this work with people in your life.
I don't think I had a moment. I think that's part of the journey of going deeper in your practice. I'm sure I've had those moments, but nothing comes in my head as like something prominent. But I think that the thing that I will say, and probably some friends would say, is I just need to be louder and that's why I love the word amplify, because I think that is what this time is bringing to many practitioners of color. It's our time. I think it is I think about the universe meeting this moment, rising to meet the moment when this book was released. It was released in June of 2020. And we had finished and put it to bed and ready to publish. And it was we were working with the publisher since the early parts of 2019 to get this book out. We were hoping that it would have gotten out by the time of the Denver National Conference on Restorative Justice. And it just many things held up the progress of it coming out. And we kept thinking, well, 2020, it's going to come out. Early 2020, it didn't. And then finally we were told, okay, it's going to be summer. So we knew it was coming. And of course, what happens in May? And after the murder of George Floyd, the world changed overnight. And then this book comes out. And people were talking about this book that didn't even know anything about restorative justice. But because of the ways that people, the richness that people were putting into this about who we are as people of color. Because that's what we put it, we didn't just put as practitioners, because there's no way to do that. Just, wash, rinse, repeat. That's not what we're talking about in terms of a practice. We're talking about who we are. And so the only way we can talk about that is by sharing our stories. And those stories resonate with the world in terms of how we show up as people of color. So to me, I would say my moment is that I can be louder. I think I was a lot more timid about the ways that I spoke about my work as a practitioner of color. Not to say that I shied away from it, but even as I was writing this book, it was this chapter, I was just like, I just hope people get it. And I also thought there are going to be some people who really don't like what I wrote about. And how am I going to deal with that?
Yeah.
But I think what it has taught me, this time has taught me, is to be, and I use the word unapologetic, but really, truly.
Yeah.
I mean, there is nothing. I feel like like if you think about peeling back layers, I peel back a whole lot of layers in this time. And yes, I suffered racial battle fatigue. I think if I had some moments, I think it's the moments where I just couldn't be everything for everybody. And I just was like, I had to shut it down for a minute, because I was having these conversations back to back quite a bit when the book came out, and talking about this work in connection to anti-racism. And about the time of the presidential election, white supremacists came out of the woodwork. I did a talk for a group that got a lot of people who came on the webinar, but it was also posted on the website. And at the time, the people who were trolling this, and I'll say trolling because they were looking to pick off people who were writing about white supremacy and anti-racism on this particular platform, because I did one part of a 3-part series on dismantling whiteness. So I get an email and it says something to the effect of, we're just checking on you to make sure you're not being trolled, because we see that the number of people that have checked out your webinar, that number has, the uptick of that has risen exponentially. And we think that certain groups have sent people to watch this so that they can go and troll and make life uncomfortable for those people who did these talks. And so for a moment, I just kind of, shut it down. And not because I was scared. I wasn't scared. I was just tired. Mm-hmm. I was really tired. So I kind of shut it down for a minute. And then, as I said to you at the beginning of this talk, I think I did the things I needed to do to take care of myself so that I could be bolder and be louder and be more strategic and be, more unapologetic.
Right.
So that's what I would say to that, as a response to that. I don't have like I'm sure I make mistakes as much as the next person. I don't know that there's something that comes to mind that.
What you gave was beautiful. Yeah. So I accept that. I'm curious. Yeah. Has there been any white lash to the book specifically? Because, I guess in the circles that I run in, of course not everyone's overwhelmingly effusive with praise. I imagine because of quote unquote restorative justice being like a quote unquote like woke field, the people who are struggling with the ideas maybe struggling in silence. I'm curious if there's been any overt white lash that you've experienced.
Not that, no, not that I personally have experienced. Except, like, yeah, I can't think of anything where someone has, and you say white lashed. I say more about what you mean, because I may be misinterpreting that.
White fragility.
Yeah.
Or
that is what I thought.
Yeah.
Not overt. Yes, I do think there are some people who are uncomfortable, but I can't name a way that it has come to me in a bold way where someone's told me to not do something. But I just remember speaking to a group, and I just knew some people just were getting it and they were feeling it. I'm on a Zoom screen talking about my chapter, happy to talk about it. And I could just see one person, no face changing, no, you know how people look at you with praise and how they look at you like, can you just be done? And that was kind of that. It was just kind of, so that's about the extent. And I could live with that, but no, like, this is wrong. You can't do that. Or, I'm grateful that my community supports me that way. I feel very privileged that I have that in my community. And I'm not saying everybody has come out, but I feel very fortunate that a large number of people have supported this book. Like in my community where I live, there are people who have bought the book, who who have asked me to speak on it and things like that. I think the thing that has been most interesting is the political ways that this has played out. There was a talk I was supposed to give at a public university, and it had to be postponed because their legal department saw white supremacy, racialized harm, just all the tick words, all the anti-racism. And if you will recall, under the previous administration, there was an executive order that was written that people had started to hold public institutions' feet to the fire. So legal called that person and said, hey, can you change your flyer for this where Ms. Wilson is speaking? And can you tell her to not say certain things in her lecture? And I just told my contact, I said, I'll do you one better. I'm going to cancel because there is no way I'm going to be able to talk about this and dance around the topic. So we postponed. And I said, hey, let's pick this back up in the new year and let's see what happens with the new administration. I had never paid attention to executive orders more than this time on day one. When I sat and watched the whole inauguration, and then I watched some more, and then I watched some more until it got down to what executive orders were going to be signed that day. And when they named that a lot of the, whatever was written into executive orders by the previous administration was basically rescinded by the new executive order, I was like, hallelujah, I'm back on. So I sent my contact an email. He's like, oh yeah, we're already moving forward full steam ahead. So I'm scheduled to speak now at that institution with great fanfare. But my point is, all of this got to be like super, like, and the people who were probably responding to that were probably, I can't prove it, but they probably were white people who were saying, oh, well, can you tell her to tweak that? It's like, no, I'm not tweaking anything. I'm just not going to do it. And I said, hey, if it comes down to it and nothing gets changed, I will do it at my institution. And you all can send your people to my institution and we'll do it there.
Right. I mean, like, I
So,
think there's so much about like, there's a whole nother conversation about like how it is now easier than ever to put out your content and communicate with folks in the world. But that's a whole nother conversation. I'm glad that that was able to work out for you there. What is next for you with KipCore, personally, NACRJ?
oh, um, so KipCore, here in Kansas, where I'm at. I tell people, I didn't say this, but I'm in North Newton, Kansas, which is about 30 minutes north of Wichita, which if you put your finger down in the map, we're right in the middle of the country. So we, KipCore is at Bethel College, which is a small Mennonite institution. And we have a diverse student body. What I am excited about is the ways that our students are embracing restorative justice, like they haven't before. In recent years, a lot of there used to be courses offered on restorative justice, and it kind of went away. And when I came to KipCore in 2017, I was told that we were starting a new program where students would be able to minor with a criminal and restorative justice minor. And that was exciting. So the first cohort is coming out this spring. So 3 students will be graduating with that minor. So to me, that's exciting.
Yeah.
In addition, I will be doing a lot of training we have educators in the state of Kansas, where KipCore has been instrumental in doing a lot of the training. Over 1,000 teachers in the state of Kansas have been trained by KipCore in restorative practices. And we'll be training a lot more, a larger cohort this year. And we've been able to host some very interesting speakers. So this is, by the time this podcast comes out, we will have sent out a save the date, but we will be having a well-known journalist, Leonard Pitts, speak at a peace lecture at the end of the year, end of our school year in the spring. And he's going to, he did a peace lecture years ago before I arrived here, on, what we were coming into in the age of Trump. And so now, on the backside of the Trump administration, we felt like he should come back and do another lecture. So he's going to be doing that. So that's exciting. And we're just, this is day to day. There's not one day I go to work where it's the same as the day before. That's scary, and that's exciting all at the same time. As far as NACRJ, we are full steam ahead getting prepared for this conference next year in Chicago. And I am thrilled beyond measure, because we had put things on hold as a result of COVID, and people needed to last year just take care of themselves as practitioners. And the conference was kind of the last thing on people's minds when you're in a space where there is a lot of upheaval, and for many, in the ways that it was told to me, a lot of people were experiencing extreme loss in large communities like that. So the idea of working on a conference was like the last thing on people's minds. So they just started back up again. The conference will be in June of next year. So there's a lot of work that's got to happen between now and then. And we have just started off with a bang. So there's that. And we're doing a lot of infrastructure work for NACRJ, which I think will definitely undergird us to do some major things going into the next year. And as far as me, I am just excited about the ways that new opportunities to write about what this is. Some of it may be a carryover of some of the things I've been writing about in this chapter, but they're new thoughts and ideas I've been having about how this whole racial reckoning is applying itself to everybody leaning in. Like I said, I just see where restorative justice has a place everywhere. So how can we work toward implementation on all those levels? In like we know how to do it in schools, but do we know how to do it in corporate America? Do we know how to do it in our communities, in large forms, in faith-based communities?
Is there a place in particular where you're like, it needs to be here?
I do think it needs to be in corporate America, because it's like the last bastion of where people just do horrific crime. Like white collar crime is like, it's acceptable. Let's face it. The ways that we give people excuses for that 1% is ridiculous. And I will go so far as to say, how is it that we have an administration, a presidential administration, that has gotten away with all that it's gotten away with without any process, without any ways of being held accountable? Because we don't say restorative justice belongs there, but it absolutely does, and we can absolutely see it. And we can see what happens when there's nothing. There's no connection to people being empathetic. There's no connection to people being held accountable. But we know it's possible. So I do believe that there are ways that we haven't addressed, because we just haven't been invited in major ways. But that's part of this dismantling. This is part of the lack of the formal ways that corporate structure, and I say that in government, I say that in private organizations, they all have ways of having to answer to their public. That's part of the dismantling process to me, is I am part of your public. I am saying that as part of that, you should have to answer to us in the ways that you process.
Seems like a tall task.
It is a tall task.
I just Googled Leonard Pitts, and he just put out a commentary headlined like, "I do not believe unity is possible." So it kind of flies in the face of all that. I remain hopeful, and like for me, it's like go where the doors are open.
Well, absolutely, but how many doors are really open? Let's just be honest about that. Can the door be open like this? And you how many doors have you been at where it's like this, but you can go in? Yeah, you can go in.
For the listening audience, fingers were very close together and then a little bit wider.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, sometimes the doors open a crack, but it doesn't mean you can't go in. Mm-hmm. It means that we have to decide we have a place there. I don't have anything against revolutionaries who say I'm going to take up space and I'm going to chain myself to something here because I belong to it too. I'm not saying that I'm against that, but I'm saying that I don't even think sometimes we think that we should go in. And this is what whiteness says. Whiteness says, not only will I go in a cracked door, I'll go in when it's closed and it's locked, and I'll knock on the door and I will demand to have a seat at the table. So you see what I'm saying? I mean, To me, it's like sometimes there isn't that invitation, and yet there's still a way that we can be involved with a little bit of, with a little bit of effort.
Yeah.
Doesn't even have to be a lot of effort.
What I'm curious, I haven't asked this before. You have an audience with the current president. What do you say to him? With the current president, what do you say to him about restoring, repairing, accountability, all that?
I say to him that I believe that we, again, I think a seat at the table in some of these, in cabinet, in the ways that we are looking at systems around the country, in the ways that we are looking at, I know that in the past, as a matter of fact, a group of folks who are of our number have had a seat at his table when he was looking at sexual harm in higher ed. They worked with President Biden's group. And so I believe the expansion of that type of listening, that type of ways of influencing policy, is there should be a restorative person in every facet of the ways that policy making is going on within the cabinet. There are ways that, because of the things that we have gone through of late, that it is necessary for him to have someone like us at the table in those meetings, because the mandate is saying we are not going back to the days of, begging for space for people of color. You need us, and it is necessary for us as practitioners of color to be a part of the processes and the policy-making bodies that are doing things that really where our country hangs in the balance right now, especially in the ways that we are needing to take care of one another after a pandemic, in the ways of handling racialized harm. It's just necessary. So that would be some of the language that I would use. That would be some of the things I would say. And I do believe that there are some folks of our number getting those seats at the table. And I'm going to be thrilled and excited as I celebrate those moments with folks. So it's coming.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, we'll tweet this part of the podcast out. Tag President Biden, put it out in the universe. Aside from President Biden, you get to sit in circle with 4 people. Who are they? And what's the question you ask?
Now, see, you had to ask me that yesterday because I had to think long. That's a hard one. Oh, you know who one of the people would be, and you don't know him, but it would be my father. Mm-hmm. My father passed away in 2018. And my father was the first African-American firefighter for the city of Tallahassee, where I'm from. So if I could bring him back. Did you say living or dead? I
living
hope
or
you
dead.
Say that. Okay, good. But my dad, I so many times I do things and I'm like, oh man, if I could talk to my dad about this, or, oh, Dad would love this. He taught me to love history, and a lot of the ways that I embrace the work around the civil rights movement and the Black history that I have learned about comes from him. I would say a person that Maya Angelou. Mm-hmm. She says so often the things that I think. I keep her book. I pull this out at least once or twice a week. The Complete Collected Poems of Maya Angelou. I have this book on my shelf. I use it for openings and closings for a circle all the time. But she speaks so wisely. I think she was someone that spoke in ways that she did not have to shout. Her words were her words carried exclamation to me. Um, okay, so somebody I've been reading on, learning more about, Frederick Douglass.
Mm-hmm.
Just the ways that he came into power, the ways that he had to speak so boldly about citizenship at a time when, we're talking about being unapologetic. He spoke so unapologetically to people who could have taken his life.
Yeah.
And in a time when they did not recognize him. And he always stood in danger before the Civil War, before emancipation, because he was a runaway slave.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he was having these very public discussions and made these very public speeches about citizenship in a way that one would dare not to do in those times. Yeah. Oh man, gosh, this is hard. I don't know who the fourth would be. I often think about all the ways that things come to me, and it's not just through historic figures, but musicians, artists. See, you asked me today. Okay, you asked me today, right?
Mm-hmm.
You asked me tomorrow, it'll be a different four people. But I'm going to say the songs of Marvin Gaye speak to me. I just love the way he thinks. I love the way he wrote songs. I love the way he wrote songs about the times at I mean just out of angst, and just I could play his music every day.
Yeah. So Marvin Gaye. Yeah, Marvin Gaye, Maya Angelou, Frederick Douglass, and your father. What's the question that you ask that group?
Oh wow. How do you make meaning in times of adversity? How do you keep your joy in times of adversity? Something along those lines.
For sure. What's one mantra or affirmation that you want to share with the people listening now?
I'm thinking more about the ways that life is really too short to be doing something that you don't absolutely love. That it's like the air you breathe. I think we spend a lot of time doing the things that we feel obligated to, and we hope that it'll be satisfying, but we're not really operating on that level where it's the thing that we would do for free. It's the thing that we would do for air. It's the thing that we would do in lieu of my next meal. I just think there are ways that that's what life is pointing me to. As I'm at her age, I think about how I want very much to do the things that create impact for the most people. When I'm thinking about projects, I'm always thinking about how wide can this go? How high can this go? How deep can this go? Because I think otherwise, it's not that I don't care about the individuals, because I do. But when I think about resources and I think about the ways that resources can get squandered on a few, I get really picky about impact. So that's important.
That's resonant for me in the yes, I'm doing Amplify RJ work, right? The work that's literally this, and not everything that I do on the day to day is life affirming, is what I want to be doing within the context of all this. And so it's the balance of like taking care of the things that you need to do to continue to do the things that you want to do.
Yes. Yes. And we all are there. We all are there. Yeah.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Who's one person that I should have on this podcast? And you have to help me get them on here.
See, you named all my people. Let's see. Who do you have to have that you don't have? Have you had Michelle Day on here?
Oh, no, I haven't.
You need to have Michelle Day on here, because Michelle is someone that this community is going to need to hear from, because she has much work to do in helping to pull together. You've heard from Sheryl, of course, one other convener who is helping to organize the National Conference on Restorative Justice. Michelle is the other, and you really need to have her on. Plus, she is just an amazing human being with an incredible story, and I think she is somebody who really exemplifies what Chicago produces in a practitioner. Love this woman. And so, yes, please have her on your podcast.
I normally say, like, oh, I'll be looking forward to that introductory email, but I should just text her right after this.
I was going to say,
I should just text her after this, yeah.
Yes.
And so a lot of your co-authors have been forgetting. This is the part where I say, like, how can people support you and your work? First of all, by Colorizing Restorative Justice from Living Justice Press. And how else can they support you and your work in the ways you want to be supported?
I would say, the by the ways that people participate in with NACRJ, either through private donations or through membership. If you are not a member of NACRJ, you need to become a member. There are benefits to membership. We offer mini grants to our members, and mini grants can support something from we talked about impact. We're looking for those projects. They don't have to be huge ones, and you don't need sometimes you don't need a boatload of money, but you need some money to start. Maybe it's seed money to start a project in your community that is restorative justice based. We could be that for you. And also it gives you a significant discount in coming to the conference if you are a member. And there are other ways that we have a very robust network of people who are working around the country that you would have access to. And we are doing all kinds of projects that pop up here and there throughout the year. So if you're not a member, you should become a member. Try us on, and definitely keep your membership through next year to get to the conference. And then as far as KIPCOR, I mean, we would love it if people visit our website, kipcor.org. There are all kinds of trainings that we offer. Now that we're doing virtual trainings, anybody can attend from around the world. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, we teach and train in restorative practices. We also teach and train in conflict resolution and mediation. So any of those needs that you have, we are now not just connected to the state of Kansas, but we also are indigenous to what we're doing in the country in terms of practices around conflict. Anything that's conflict resolution related, we can do. And we also have a film series, and we also have this peace lecture series that I'm having Leonard Pitts come and speak. So check out our website. And please donate.
There you go. So NACRJ, KIPCOR, Colorizing Restorative Justice. Any last words? Any last words for the good people?
Oh, this has been a wonderful experience, David, and I'm just so thrilled to get time with you. I wish you much success in what you're doing. What you're doing with this podcast is you have such an amazing platform. And I am hoping for many people to tune in and to stay connected with what you're doing. I just say the ways that we support the work in all facets. We are supporting, if we're supporting RJ, we're supporting each other. And I think the idea of all boats rising, like I said before, if you're successful, we all are successful. So in that, I'm grateful for any opportunity I can talk about the work that we do. I'm grateful for any opportunity that I can help people have a greater understanding of what this is, of what we call restorative justice. And obviously, I'm excited about giving practitioners of color a platform like they've never had before.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sheryl, for all of your time, your wisdom, your experiences. We will have this episode out in a couple weeks from now, early March. For everyone else who's listening, this is when you're hearing it. Another great episode is coming out next week. Until then, take care.
Thank you, David. This has been awesome, awesome, awesome.
Elise here. Thank you so much to Sheryl for all of your amazing insight. And it's so hard to pick just a few moments out of each of these episodes. But one thing that really stuck out to me this episode was Sheryl's conversation about whiteness in activism. She brought up the point of allyship and how allyship can often be misconstrued. Allies are important, but it's also important to realize that they can take off their badge of allyship whenever they want, but people of color can't do the same. How can you encourage white people in your community to do their part as well? Also, I'd like to add that it is not the job of people of color to teach white people how to be anti-racist. It is important to take this mission upon yourself and your own personal journey. How can you become more anti-racist? Also, Sheryl mentioned that it is the responsibility of people in power to make a seat at the table for people of color and to uplift the voices of people of color, instead of putting the entire weight of activism on people of color. There are so many great things that we can learn from voices like this, and if you would like to hear more voices, please check out our YouTube channel and our Future Ancestors Collective, as well as our upcoming workshop on April 3rd. Can't wait to see you there, and I'll see you next week.
Like what you heard? Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast on whatever platform you're using right now. It really helps us further amplify this work. You can also support us by following us on our social platforms, signing up for our email list, rocking our new merch, joining our Patreon, or signing up for a workshop. So many options! Links to everything in the show notes and on our website, amplifyrj.com. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.